Okay, I've been trying to avoid this, but I can't deny it any longer. Long form content just doesn't cut it anymore. If I want OptimusPhillip reviews to maintain a sustainable presence, I'm gonna need to pivot to YouTube Shorts. Which means that I'm gonna need to do this whole review in less than 1 minute. Bit daunting, but I'm sure I can manage it. Of all the vehicles invented for the 86 Transformers line, Blurr is definitely the most distinct from anything that you see on the road, which just makes it all the more impressive that designers of Hasbro's cars still managed to recreate it almost flawlessly. It helps that it's nice and hard to deal with. With the long nose, open cockpit, it almost looks like a space age version of a Formula Racer, and the smooth curves from side sections really gives the impression that it could reach some serious speeds, especially those thrust on the back. Seriously, this is insane. There's no way this is losing a race against any other car but itself. There's also a pretty impressive level of paint deco going into making this so much work. Wherever they could, they not only painted every decal he had in the movie, but molded it in as well. I'm a big fan of the long swooping curves across the sides. It makes the vehicle feel extra sleek. Of course, there seem to be some unfaithful parts. The rear thrusters are missing the dark blue accents, and you can see where the swooping deco is molded to continue across the robot forearms, but the paint doesn't follow it. The blue really the only part they exception with. Everything else looks really nice. My favorite deco is probably on the windshield piece. The windshield itself is a clear insert, and underneath it is a large white paint cap that brings out the underlying mold detail. This not only creates a layer effect, but it also replicates the white windshield set of the animation model without sacrificing smooth, glassy. Damn it! You know, it's kind of interesting when you think about just what Transformers characters end up being breakouts from their original fiction. Out of all the new Autobots to come out of the 86 movie, you'd probably expect the breakout character to be Hot Rod, the rising young hero, or Springer, the tough as nails fighter, or even RC, the token girl. But between losing the Hot Rod trademark, Triple Changers getting phased out for a while there, and girl characters not being marketable to preteen boys, all of these choices fell away. So instead, Blurr, of all characters, ended up getting the most airtime across the history of Transformers, with new incarnations appearing in Armada, Cybertron, Animated, and the 2015 Robots in Disguise series. I guess Blue Speedster characters just have a lot of staying power. So let's round out our coverage of the Studio Series 86 Autobot car trio with a look at the newest Blur figure to come out, and see how well it carries on this bizarre legacy. Of all the new vehicles invented for the 86 Transformers lineup, Blurr's is definitely the most distinct from anything that you would see on the road. Which just makes it all the more impressive that the designers at Hasbro and Takara still managed to recreate it almost flawlessly. It helps that it's such a nice looking car to begin with. With the long nose and open cockpit, it almost looks like a space-age version of a Formula Racer, and the smooth curvature of the side sections really gives the impression that it could reach some serious speeds. Especially with those thrusters on the back. Seriously, this is insane. There is no way this is losing a race against any other car but itself. There's also a pretty impressive level of paint deco going into making this homage work. Wherever they could, they not only painted every decal he had in the movie, but molded it in as well. I'm a big fan of the long swooping curves across the sides. It makes the vehicle feel extra sleek. Of course, there seem to be some unpaintable parts. The rear thrusters are missing the dark blue accents, and you can see where the swooping deco is molded to continue across the robot forearms, but the paint doesn't follow it. But those are really the only parts I take exception with. Everything else looks really nice. My favorite bit of deco is probably on the windshield piece. The windshield itself is a clear insert, and underneath it is a large white paint tap that brings out the underlying molded detail. This not only creates a layered effect, but it also replicates the white windshield aesthetic of the animation model without sacrificing the smooth, glassy appearance of the clear polycarbonate. Hey Hasbro, this is the kind of clear plastic usage I want to see more of. Small static pieces that only show what they're supposed to. Like the Origin Jazz figure I reviewed a few months back, this figure has no wheels. Instead, the weight of the vehicle rests on the robot feet, creating the illusion that the vehicle is hovering. I think it works much better here than it did on Jazz. The fact that the feet are so close to the vehicle's center keeps them from being too obvious, even if they are visible from the side. And just in general, it feels much more deliberate, rather than just repurposing random kibble. Side note, I find it really amusing that the witness marks on the feet from the ejector pins just happen to line up with where the hover engines are on the animation model. Just a coincidence, I'm sure, but a fun one. Unfortunately, the lack of wheels does still leave the vehicle somewhat lacking in play value. There is a tab on the underside of the nose where you can attach the gun, and flanking that tab are a pair of slots where you can attach the welding torch. It's kind of neat how the two pieces fit together, I guess, but the gun just looks ridiculous sticking that far out from the front of the car, especially considering that it's mounted on its side. On the plus side, the thrusters are 5mm compatible, so you can get a boost effect out of them. Still, the vehicle itself doesn't really do much. It's very much just a display piece. On the whole, I'd say that Blurr's vehicle mode is a step up from Jazz and a step to the side from Cup. He pulls off the hovering better than Jazz, but the weapon integration is a bit lackluster. And while Cup didn't have as many features, the lack of any sort of rolling does severely limit playability. Still, it looks really good on a display, and I think that's going to do it for most collectors. Blurr's transformation starts out a little on the fiddly side, mainly as a result of the torso side panels. The arms tab into the sides of the car, but there's also a notch inside the torso panel for the wrist hinge to rest in. The problem is that there isn't enough clearance for the hinge to move around in there, so the hinge needs to pop out over the top while it's also trying to come undone from the side tabs. It's a very clunky step, which is immediately followed by another clunky step, where you need to untab the feet from the torso panels and then fold the panels up to flank the cockpit. You really need to push the limits of the joints to make this happen, and I don't like that. Once those are out of the way though, everything goes relatively smoothly. The transformation process actually takes a lot of cues from the Titan's Return version, with the arms folding up on armatures, the shins opening to unfurl the legs, and the nose of the car folding up to form his back. You even fold up the seat the same way. The only real differences are that the fenders rotate around before folding up, and the windshield piece actually rotates instead of just collapsing in. Oh, and the head stays on in vehicle mode. It's kind of an interesting choice to just recycle most of the engineering from the character's last toy, but I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I have to admit, this ain't broke. Blurr is looking just about the best he's ever been in robot mode. He's slender and sleek looking, while still looking like a sturdy young Autobot, exactly what I would expect from this character. Putting him next to Cup, the big thing I notice is how much thicker the arms are. They're not powerlifter arms or anything like that, but there's definitely some metal on this chassis that Cup sorely needed. Weirdly, the torso and legs aren't that much thicker on Blurr. I don't know if just bulking out the arms really made that much of a difference, or if Blurr being a speedster character just gives him more leeway in that regard. But either way, the proportions on this figure give him a very solid look. They really nailed the head sculpt on this toy. Compared to all the Generations-style greeble on the body, the head is Sunbow smooth. I think it's kind of amusing that the head looks like a tiny version of the car's rear end, with the antenna on top and the grating across the sides. I also like how the light pipe on the back of the head just happens to match the base plastic color so well. It's almost certainly a coincidence, but it means they could make the window as big as they wanted without compromising the aesthetic. Which would be great if the light piping actually worked, but there needs to be a light source right behind the figure to get any sort of effect. So sadly, this didn't really pan out. Comparing him to his animation model, pretty much everything is here. As annoying as the torso panels are, I do like how they bulk him out, giving him a more natural-looking torso without compromising the vehicle aesthetic. And unlike the Titan's Return figure, there's no thrusters on the legs. There's still an exposed hinge, but it's much smaller and less visible. Also, I don't know if this is intentional, but I think it's really clever that the detail from the rear of the car ends up matching almost perfectly to the gaps in the back of his boots on the cartoon model. Even the kibble on his arms is animation accurate. Okay, they're backwards, but they're still supposed to be there. Though I will admit, I wish they actually tabbed in. There is a tab for them to connect to, but they either don't hold in at all or actively get squeezed out. That could just be my copy though, mileage may vary. The one piece of kibble that shouldn't be here is the nose of the car. In the animation model, this shrinks down to form his crotch plate, and the backpack is formed from the rear section of the car. Obviously that wasn't going to work here, so I'm fine with them doing this with it instead. If I had to nitpick, I would say that I wish the nose could collapse more and form something more resembling the backpack from the cartoon. But that might be asking a bit much. This toy already has a lot going on. Which brings me nicely into talking about articulation. The neck is on a ball joint, but the shape of the parts makes it only really useful for rotation. The shoulders are universal, with a soft ratchet for the forward rotation. The elbows bend to 90, and there is a bicep swivel. The hands are technically on a swivel, but that's purely for transformation and doesn't work for posing. Not only are they attached to the fender pieces, which lock into place beneath the forearms, but even if you untab them, they only rotate in one direction. This is kind of annoying. I feel like there was a way they could have designed this to make an actual wrist swivel work. Maybe if the fender was attached to the forearm and that was the part that flipped around for transformation? I don't know, I'm just spitballing. Anyways, the waist swivels on a mushroom peg, and the nose piece can move just enough to allow for full rotation. The hips are universal, and he has thigh swivels, though they're only cut for 90 degrees of rotation. The knees bend to 90, and the ankles can pivot inwards as well as forward thanks to the transformation. So you can get some nice dynamic poses out of this guy, which is good considering how big a deal mobility is for him. Similar to Cup, Blurr comes with two accessories, one of which being his gun. It's about as on model as the toy itself. The fins on the sides aren't as wide as they should be, but otherwise it's pretty close. It's even got the little iron sight on the front and everything. For some reason, I really like this sort of L-shaped detail on the top fin. No idea why, it just amuses me. You know, I'm realizing that whoever designed these weapons seems to really like these square ridged pieces. It's almost a theme at this point. The gun looks really good in his hand, nice and large like a proper rifle. You can even get him to kind of hold it in two hands like he did during the Battle of Autobot City. Unfortunately, the barrel of the gun lacks any connection point for a blast effect. Not sure why, the boosters were clearly designed with fire blast parts in mind, so I don't know why they didn't design the gun that way. His other accessory is a complete curveball, in the form of the welding torch he used when fixing the shuttle on Junkion. I'll give it this, it's pretty accurate to what's shown in the movie. It's bulked out quite a bit to fit over his hand, and it's the wrong color, but the shape is correct and the details are all there. But at the same time, is this really something that belongs in a deluxe class package? I'm not opposed to it being included, but it's more the sort of thing I'd expect from a masterpiece release, not a tightly budgeted mainline toy. I don't know, it just makes me wonder what else this money could have been used for. Also, there's something just a little off about the feeling of the white plastic used here. It's probably not coming across well on camera, it's certainly not coming across well to my eye, but in my hands, it feels just rough enough to seem unfinished. Even compared to the unpaintable parts of other figures. I'm not entirely sure what's causing this, and it's probably not that big a deal, but it's something that does bother me personally, and I thought I would bring it up. Blurr's backdrop is branded as the Battle of Autobot City. More specifically, it depicts the shot from the beginning of the battle, where Perceptor alerts Ultra Magnus and his crew to the Decepticons' approach. Bit of an odd choice, since Perceptor is the central figure in that shot, while Blurr is just a background character at best. But Blurr is prominently featured in later shots at this location, so I guess it counts? I don't know, I think it would have made more sense to package this backdrop with Perceptor instead, and oh, would you look at that? Confusing shot choice aside, this is actually a very nice recreation. The fact that of all the shots of Autobot City, I was able to instantly recognize which one this was speaks a lot to the attention of detail here. Or to my own lack of a social life. Either way, they captured the scenery pretty much to a T. The only real flaw I see is this area on the left-hand side, where it seems they've just made a bunch of stuff up. I'm guessing the artist was only given a single screenshot to work with, and had to just guess at what was being blocked by Perceptor, even though the answer was visible just a second earlier in the actual scene. Not a big deal though, just weird. Everything else, meanwhile, is recreated pretty faithfully. The big central tower, the massive pipe, the glass dome, even this one purple explosion perfectly matches one from the movie. And because the scene was already so well detailed, all the panel lining actually makes it more accurate. When I look at this, it honestly feels like I'm looking at a frame from the movie. I just wish I had a perceptor to complete the scene. Unfortunately, we're back to the problem I have with most Studio Series backdrops. Once again, Blurr is feeling pretty cramped on his pedestal. Any pose you put him in, you can only expand him to the sides and to the front. The slightest extension towards the back will bump up against the backdrop, causing him to either lose his footing, or worse, knock the whole thing down. So basically, you either need to put him in a static stance, or let him step off the pedestal for a more dynamic pose. Vehicle mode is a similar story. The pedestal is almost the exact same size as the car's footprint, maybe even a little smaller. So while it does fit, it only fits in one very specific way, and anything you add on will only make it fit less. So if you plan on adding thrust effects to the back or the gun onto the front, you'd better hope the side flaps stay wide open. This is all to be expected, I guess. I think I'm just a little spoiled by the rest of the trio. I don't think it would be too controversial of me to call this a great toy. The vehicle mode may be a little lackluster, but the transformation is, for the most part, smooth and satisfying, and the robot mode is a masterclass of Transformer design. Pretty much all the criticisms I have are nitpicks that barely detract from my enjoyment. I would almost say that this is the standard against which all deluxe cars should be held against. It is that good. If you don't already have a copy of this toy, I would highly suggest picking one up. And there are a lot of them floating around, so it shouldn't be too hard to find one. Now, what other 86 Autobots have I not talked about? Let's see, Rodimus, Hara, Kappa... Wait, is it finally time for the Commander? In this world, where one